Shalom, and welcome to the 70 Weeks Revealed, Part 2, DaniEl, Chapter 9, Verse 25, by DaniEl Fuentes, servant of Yod-Heh-Wahe. How this knowledge was gained. All honor and praise is to the Most High Yod-Heh-Wahe. This servant has sought him in humility, with prayer, through study, in deep reflection, over periods of time, with many corrections that continue to this very day, ongoing corrections. Let us remember that all revelation proceeds from Ruach Qodesh, according to Yahushua himself, who told us that the Ruach that would be given to us would teach us and remind us of all that he told us. Any errors are attributable to my own human nature, who is not perfect but is striving on the narrow path. Let us get into the Almighty's Word. Here we have the book of DaniEl, chapter 9, verse 25. Know then and understand from the going forth of the command to restore and build Yerushalayim until Messiah the Prince is 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It shall be built again with streets and a trench, but in times of affliction. You'll notice I highlighted some text in purple to focus on. We see that we've been given a beginning point and an ending point that totals 69 weeks. Paying attention to the separation of the 62 weeks and 7 weeks in DaniEl 9:25. As I shared, we have a beginning point and an ending point that I've highlighted in purple, and on this slide I would like us to focus our attention on the separation of the 69 weeks, which was very intentional. We see that it's been separated into 7 weeks and 62 weeks. This scripture could have been written as 69 weeks, but it is not. Instead, it is separated to show a distinction between the first 62 weeks, which are completed before Messiah's death, and we'll see that as we continue to study these verses in DaniEl chapter 9, and also the 7 weeks that follow and complete the 69 weeks. This servant will show how these 7 weeks account for the years from Messiah's death to his return for battle at Har Megiddo. Har means mount. So let's pay attention to this separation and understand that the first 62 weeks are completed before Messiah's death. We'll see evidence of that in the scripture, and that the next 7 weeks that follow are the timing before the weeks that are accomplished until the Messiah returns for battle at the 69th week, at the close of it. When did the 70 weeks count begin? The 70 weeks count began at the time of the commandment to rebuild the city of Yerushalayim. This happened in 445 before Common Era, under the rule of Persian sovereign Artaxerxes, also known as Artaxashta. Nehemiah chapter 2 verse 1 shows that it was in the 20th year of the reign of this sovereign that Nehemiah requested and received permission to return to Yerushalayim to rebuild it. Artaxerxes reigned from 464 before Common Era to 423 before Common Era. Therefore, the 20th year of his reign was 445 before Common Era. Nehemiah and a third wave of Yehudim then returned to Yerushalayim to rebuild the city walls and gates. So here we have our starting point, according to this scripture. Our starting point, which is from the commandment to rebuild Yerushalayim. And here we have the starting point, 445 before Common Era. Is the commandment in Nehemiah until Messiah 69 weeks of years or 483 years? We're going to test two scenarios here to see if it's referring to from the moment of Nehemiah's received commandment to the birth of Messiah. Does that equal 483 years? And also whether from the time of Nehemiah's received commandment to the death and resurrection of Messiah, whether that equals 483 years. From Nehemiah's received commandment in 445 BCE to the birth of Yahushua in 3 BCE equals 443 years, or approximately 63 weeks of years, with the calculation coming out to 63.28. So we see that the scripture is not referring to the time of the received commandment of Nehemiah to rebuild Yerushalayim to the birth of Yahushua the Messiah, because it's only 443 years. It's not meeting the requirement of 483 years. From Nehemiah's received commandment in 445 BCE to the death and resurrection of Yahushua in 28 Common Era equals 473 years, or approximately 67.5 weeks of years, with the calculation being 67.57, which equals 67 weeks of years plus 3 years and 6 months. Now this one is closer to the required 483 years, but still falls short by 10 years. These calculations prove that it is not a straight count of 69 weeks of years or 483 years for how to interpret DaniEl chapter 9 verse 25. Pay attention to the 69th week in association with the Messiah. So now we know we're not to interpret this scripture in DaniEl 9 verse 25 referring to the 69 weeks as though it's referring to from the commandment of Nehemiah that's received by him to rebuild Yerushalayim up to the Messiah's birth, or even up to his death or resurrection. Those are not correct. This servant believes the 62 weeks or 434 years were completed in 24 Common Era. This is significant because DaniEl 9:26 will show these 62 weeks take place before Messiah's death. From 445 BCE to 24 Common Era equals 469 years. Now this is a mystery because I just shared with you all that the 62 weeks requires 434 years. And I just shared with you all that I believe the 62 weeks are already completed in 24 Common Era. So one would think, well then, from 445 before Common Era to 24, it should equal 434 if I'm correct, that the 62 weeks are completed. And yet, as you see in this calculation, from 445 before Common Era to 24, it does not equal 434 years. It equals 469 years. And that mystery is resolved in this manner. From 469, which is what we have, years, subtracting the 434 years, which is what the required 62 weeks should be, we see that there are 35 years over that are not counted. The question is, why not? How the commandment in Nehemiah until Messiah is 69 weeks of years, or 483 years. We must understand that in this scripture in DaniEl 9:25, when it says until Messiah, it's not referring to Yahshua's year of birth or his year of death and resurrection, but is speaking of his return for battle at Har Megiddo, at the close of the 69th week. The 70 weeks count began in 445 BCE and continued to 40 BCE, completing 58 weeks or 406 years. Then paused for 35 years. There we see the 35 years that were missing. There was a pause. Paused for 35 years. Then resumed in 4 BCE, according to the Almighty's will, to fulfill 62 weeks or 434 years in 24 Common Era. So we see there was a pause. After 58 weeks were completed, there was a pause, and then it resumed. The count resumed in 4 BCE and continued up into 24 Common Era with the completion of the 62 weeks. These 35 years between counts were 39 BCE to 5 BCE. So these are the years that were not counted in the 69 weeks. These, which span from the year Herod the Great was appointed king of Yehuda by Rome, and you can look this up yourself. There's a historian named Appian, and he's the one who recorded this year of 39 BCE. We also have Josephus. I believe he referred to it as 40 BCE. I believe that Appian's record is more accurate. It fits into this narrative, so I've used his. So again, 39 BCE to 5 BCE, this time period, which was not counted, it spans from the year of Herod the Great, when he was appointed king of Yehuda by Rome, and includes the continuity of his reign until 5 BCE. These 35 years are not included in the 70-week count, but counting resumed in 4 BCE with Herod's death and the announcement and conception of Yahushua. So that you can prove historically that this Herod did die in 4 BCE in the spring, and that's the same year that Yahushua was announced and conceived, in the winter time. DaniEl 9:26 confirms the completed 62 weeks and identifies 2 additional pauses, which weeks were counted from the time of Messiah's death to the siege of Jerusalem, and which weeks are pending fulfillment. I hope you'll join me for part 3 of this presentation of DaniEl, the 70 weeks revealed. Here is the only reference that has been used in this presentation. We strictly went with the scripture, and the version that I'm using is Institute for Scripture Research, also known as ISR, from 2010, and this is actually the Scriptures. That's what it's known as, and it's the 2009 edition. To the Almighty be all the kavod for His word that He has shared with us.